The sun blazed down on the open stretch of land near the U.S.-Mexico border, casting long shadows over the crowd gathered under a makeshift stage. The American flag fluttered in the wind, alongside banners bearing the Department of Homeland Security's emblem. The scent of dust and sun-baked earth filled the air as people fanned themselves with their hats, waiting in anticipation. Kristi Noem, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, stood at the podium, her expression confident, her posture strong. A natural leader, she thrived in moments like these, where policy met the people, where words weren't just speeches but promises turned into action. The crowd, a mix of ranchers, border enforcement officers, and local residents, had come to hear her address what had become one of the most divisive issues in America: the border wall. She adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and began. "Today marks a turning point," she declared, her voice carrying over the restless murmurs. "For too long, our southern border has been exploited by human traffickers, drug cartels, and criminals who seek to take advantage of the very freedoms we hold dear. We cannot, and we will not, allow this to continue." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some held signs reading "Finish the wall," while others simply nodded in grim approval. Noem continued, her tone unwavering. "Under this administration, we are taking decisive action. Construction of the border wall resumes today. We are securing the sovereignty of the United States, enforcing the law, and ensuring that our nation remains a land of opportunity, not exploitation." Applause broke out once again, accompanied by scattered chants of USA. USA. She let it settle before pressing forward. "I want to be clear," she said, scanning the audience. "This is not about turning our backs on those who seek the American dream the right way. This is about stopping those who break our laws and endanger our citizens. There is a process, a legal way, and we will not reward lawbreakers with open doors." A wave of approval surged through the crowd. The energy was unmistakable. But then, from the middle of the gathering, a single voice cut through the noise. "This wall isn't about security. It's about fear." A hush fell over the space as heads turned. A man stepped forward from the mass of people. He was in his late 30s, Middle Eastern in appearance, dressed in a button-down shirt and jeans. His expression was one of defiance, but not anger. His voice was steady, determined. "My name is Omar Rahman," he announced, standing tall despite the glares he was now receiving. "I immigrated to this country legally. I love this country. But this wall, it is a symbol of division, not strength. You call it security, but I call it shutting the door on the people who need our help the most." A few boos rippled through the crowd, but Noem raised a hand. "Let him speak," she said, her voice calm but firm. Omar continued, emboldened. "Madam Secretary, you speak of cartels and criminals. But what about the families fleeing war, starvation, and tyranny? What about the children who will grow up seeing this wall not as protection, but as rejection? America was built on the backs of immigrants, was it not?" Noem met his gaze. This was not the first time she had faced criticism, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. She chose her words carefully. "Mr. Rahman, I appreciate your passion. But passion without facts leads to misguided conclusions." Some members of the audience clapped at that. The United States has always welcomed legal immigrants. We have an asylum system. We have laws designed to protect those who truly need refuge. What we cannot allow," she continued, her tone sharpening, "is an uncontrolled influx of people crossing illegally, bypassing those laws, overwhelming our systems, and creating chaos at our border. That is not compassion, it is recklessness. But many of these people have no choice." Omar shot back. "What do you expect them to do when their homes are destroyed, when their governments collapse?" "I expect them," Noem said coolly, "to respect the laws of the very country they hope to join. To apply for asylum legally, not to pay coyotes and drug lords to smuggle them through the desert at night. To stand in line, just as you did, Mr. Rahman." Omar flinched at that, but he wasn't done. "So you would let them die outside your precious wall?" "No," she said, stepping forward. "I would ensure that the process we have in place is followed. That criminals are separated from true asylum seekers. That our border patrol is not overwhelmed by hundreds of thousands of people surging across at once. That American families, the ones who live in border towns and face the consequences of failed immigration policies, are protected too." The crowd erupted in cheers again, while Omar stood his ground. "This is a humanitarian crisis," he said, though his voice was quieter now. "A wall won't fix that." Noem nodded. "You're right. A wall alone won't fix it. But it's a start. Because without control, there is no order. Without order, there is no country." The weight of her words hung in the air. For a moment, Omar seemed to consider them. The crowd watched, waiting for him to respond. But instead, he simply exhaled, shook his head, and retreated back into the sea of people. Kristi Noem turned back to the audience, her stance firm. "This is our home. And like any home, we have a right to protect it. We will protect it." Thunderous applause erupted once more as she stepped down from the podium. The battle of words was over. And Kristi Noem had emerged victorious. The applause was still echoing in the air as Kristi Noem stepped down from the stage. Her security detail moved in slightly, their eyes scanning the crowd for any further disruptions. She wasn't worried. Confrontations like this were inevitable, and she had long since learned to handle them with a calm, unwavering presence. But the moment with Omar Rahman had left an impression. Not because she doubted her stance, but because she knew that for every person in the crowd cheering her on, there were others, watching from afar, listening on the news, who sympathized with his argument. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting an orange hue over the desert landscape. As Noem made her way through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging brief words of gratitude with supporters, she spotted Omar standing near the back. He hadn't left. He was speaking with a few people, his face animated, his hands moving as he made his points. Kristi knew the cameras were still rolling, that the media would seize on this moment. A confrontation, especially one as charged as this, was too good for them to ignore. But she didn't shy away. She made her way toward him, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "Mr. Rahman," she called. Omar turned, clearly surprised that she had sought him out. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across his face. He glanced at the people around him, as if trying to gauge their reactions. Then he squared his shoulders and met her gaze. "You made your argument," Noem said, her tone measured. "Now let's talk." The onlookers fell silent. Some had their phones up, recording. Others simply watched, eager to see how this would play out. "Talk," Omar echoed. "I thought you already made up your mind. The wall is going up, no matter what anyone says." "That's right," Noem said. "But that doesn't mean I don't want to hear what you have to say. If you're willing to criticize me in front of hundreds of people, you should be willing to have a conversation face to face." Omar studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fine." The two of them stepped a few feet away from the crowd, though people still gathered around, listening intently. "You're an immigrant yourself," Noem said. "You followed the legal process. Why do you want to undermine it by supporting illegal crossings?" "I'm not supporting illegal crossings," Omar said, his frustration apparent. "I'm saying that the system you're defending is broken. Do you know how long the legal process takes? How many hurdles people have to go through? I was lucky, I had the resources, the connections, and yes, the time. But some people don't have that luxury. You tell them to wait, but wait where? In countries where they could be kidnapped, tortured, or killed." Noem didn't flinch. "The law can't be bent just because it's inconvenient, Mr. Rahman. If we abandon due process, we don't have a nation anymore. We have chaos." "Then fix the process," Omar pressed. "Instead of building walls, build pathways." "The process does exist," Noem countered. "But what you're suggesting would encourage more illegal immigration. If you reward people who come in illegally, you create an incentive for more to follow. That's basic cause and effect." Omar shook his head. "You're looking at this like it's a business transaction. Like these are just numbers on a spreadsheet. But these are people, Secretary Noem. Human beings. Families. What do you say to the child who's been traveling for months, the mother who has nowhere else to go?" Noem held his gaze. "I say the same thing I'd say to an American family struggling to put food on the table. I say, we have laws for a reason. We can't help everyone, and we can't put the security of our own citizens at risk just because it's heartbreaking." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Omar let out a breath, shaking his head. "And you think a wall is going to solve that?" "No," Noem said honestly. "But it's part of the solution. A wall alone won't fix everything. But it will slow down the traffickers. It will give our border agents a fighting chance. It will make it harder for criminals to slip through undetected. And that matters." Omar was silent for a moment. He looked at the ground, then back at Noem. "I didn't come here to be your enemy," he said finally. "I don't think you are," Noem admitted. "I think you care about this country, just like I do. But caring isn't enough. We need action. And my job is to protect the citizens of the United States first." Omar exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated but unable to argue against her final point. She extended a hand. "Thank you for speaking up. I may not agree with you, but I respect that you had the courage to do it." Omar hesitated, just for a moment, but then took her hand. The cameras clicked, the crowd stirred, and the moment was sealed. As Noem walked away, she knew this wouldn't be the last time she had to defend her position. But she also knew she had done what leaders must do: stand firm, face opposition, and make hard choices for the good of the nation. The wall would rise. And so would the debate. 2 nights later, Kristi Noem and Omar Rahman faced off in a primetime debate, broadcast across the country. The introduction featured dramatic clips, border patrol footage, protesters, construction of the wall, before cutting to the studio where a well-known news anchor sat between them. "Secretary Noem, you've been criticized for prioritizing security over humanitarian concerns," the anchor began. "Mr. Rahman argues that your policies are unnecessarily harsh. How do you respond?" Noem spoke first, her tone firm but controlled. "What's harsh is allowing this crisis to spiral out of control. Millions of people are flooding our borders illegally, overwhelming our resources, and endangering Americans. My job isn't to make people feel good. It's to keep this country safe." The anchor turned to Rahman. "Mr. Rahman, you've been vocal about your opposition to the border wall. Why?" Rahman took a deep breath. "Because it sends the wrong message. We are a nation built by immigrants. But this wall tells the world, you are not welcome here." Noem leaned forward. "That's not true. We do welcome immigrants, legal immigrants. We have laws for a reason, Mr. Rahman. But people aren't following them." Rahman shook his head. "Maybe because the process is too slow, too complicated. You expect someone fleeing for their life to sit and fill out paperwork while their family is in danger." Noem didn't blink. "Yes. Because that's how law and order works. If we abandon due process, we don't have a nation anymore, we have chaos." Rahman frowned but stayed composed. "You're prioritizing law over humanity. And you're prioritizing emotion over security," Noem shot back. The anchor jumped in. "Mr. Rahman, how do you suggest we balance border security with compassion?" Rahman adjusted his posture. "We need to expand asylum programs, increase the number of legal pathways, and, most importantly, treat these people as human beings, not invaders." Noem responded instantly. "That sounds great in theory, but in reality, it creates a massive incentive for more illegal crossings. If people know they can cross and get special treatment, even more will come." "Then what?" Rahman hesitated. "We reform the system to make it more efficient." Noem seized the moment. "That's vague. What does reform look like? Do we just let everyone in? Where do we house them? Who pays for it?" Rahman opened his mouth but closed it again. He didn't have a clear answer. The anchor turned to Noem. "Secretary, do you believe immigration reform is necessary?" Noem nodded. "Yes. But we secure the border first. You can't fix a leaking pipe without turning off the water. That's why the wall is necessary. It's not just about stopping crime, it's about restoring control." By the time the debate ended, the split in public opinion had deepened. Some admired Rahman's passion, but Noem's confidence and command of facts made her difficult to challenge. The aftermath. The next morning, headlines reflected the divide. Conservative outlets: Noem crushes open border activist in national debate. Liberal outlets: Rahman stands up to Noem's hardline policies. At DHS headquarters, Michael handed Noem a new report. Your approval rating is up among voters who prioritize border security. Even independents are shifting toward tougher immigration enforcement. Noem nodded, flipping through the pages. Good. Michael hesitated. But protests at construction sites are growing. Some activists are even trying to block equipment. Noem set the report down. Then we send reinforcements. We're not stopping. She looked out the window at the Washington skyline. This wasn't just a policy battle, it was about the future of the nation. And Kristi Noem had no intention of backing down. The sun was high over the desert as Kristi Noem walked onto the construction site of the border wall. The structure loomed behind her, steel and concrete rising as a testament to her administration's determination. Workers moved efficiently, machinery roared, and law enforcement officers stood on alert. On the other side of the barrier, a group of protesters had gathered again. They held signs, chanted slogans, and tried to disrupt the work. At the front of the group stood Omar Rahman. Noem approached, her boots crunching against the dry ground. She had expected this. "Madam Secretary," Omar called out, stepping closer, "you're celebrating while families are suffering. Do you really think this wall solves anything?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "It solves everything that matters. It stops criminals, smugglers, and traffickers. It protects American lives. That's my priority." "This isn't protection, it's a rejection of people in need," Omar countered. Noem folded her arms. "It's law and order. People in need have legal paths. Those who jump the line, who pay cartels to smuggle them across, aren't just desperate, they're breaking the law." "The law is broken," Omar shot back. "Then change it legally," Noem replied. "But don't demand we ignore it. No country survives without borders." The protesters murmured, some shifting uncomfortably. Omar exhaled sharply. "So this is it. You build your wall and call it a victory." Noem turned to the structure, running a hand along the cold steel. "This isn't just a wall. It's a message. The era of open borders is over." The last section of the wall was being set into place. A worker signaled, and a crane lowered the final steel panel into position. The bolts locked, the welding torches flared, and with that, the project was complete. Kristi Noem faced the crowd one last time. "This is America. We decide who comes in. Not traffickers. Not criminals. Us." Omar Rahman said nothing. He knew the fight was over. The wall stood. The border was secure. And Kristi Noem had won.